Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening or this morning, if you happen to be in the same time zone as me. I'm glad to be able to join again with you as we continue to study Bodhicitta more and more. So, let's start by just taking a moment to remember that we're here together to study the teachings of the Buddha, which is to say, we want to recognize that we are creating a sacred space for our study and practice. So even though we might be in the very mundane space of our office or our bedroom or somewhere in our home that's used for many other things, we want to develop the mindset that right now is the same as if we're in a temple, we're in a gompa, in a meditation hall, and we are here together for the purpose of studying, so we might become Buddhas, so we might have the power to work for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so transform wherever we are into that sacred space of study and practice. And as we join together, for most of you, it's the end of the day. So we let all of the stress and anxiety and worldly activities that have happened throughout the day, we leave them behind for the moment. We recognize that we come together this evening, not for our own benefit alone, not just to learn how to be happier in our own lives, but so that we might learn the techniques and methods to benefit all sentient beings. And we recognize that the way we can be of maximum benefit to other sentient beings, the way we can fulfill the purpose of our life by bringing others happiness, is that we ourselves achieve the state of Buddhahood. And that'll afford us the greatest opportunity to benefit others. And so it's for that reason that we've come together today to study, to practice together, so that we might achieve Buddhahood, and so that we might be of service to other sentient beings. And so with this strong motivation, we'll just do very quick refuge and bodhicitta prayer. In the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha, until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha in the Buddha's Dharma and Sangha. Until enlightened I seek refuge, through merit from giving and the rest. To aid all may I become Buddha. Great, thank you. So with that, we'll begin. Start with a little bit of housekeeping. I hope you enjoyed the articles that were suggested last week, and I have a few more to suggest this week, and I'm gonna give them to you now in the chat so that they're there available. Last week is when I realized that you had all of the course materials available on the website. So the articles today are going to come from that handout, which you can download from the website. I'm also going to upload it to the chat. So all of the teachings I'm going to suggest that you study over the week are in this handout. So I'm going to suggest 3 of them that you look at over the week. The first one in that booklet is one that I already linked to in the first week. So you've already read that one. So the 3 I'm going to advise that we look at this week is Generating the Bodhi Mind, which is the second one in that booklet by Kyabje Rinpoche. The Kindness of the Mother, which is the third one in that booklet by Kyabje Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And The Nature of Compassion, which is the sixth one in that booklet. And I know that this course we're doing together, it's not the official course insofar as people aren't necessary. I'm not giving out homework. There's not going to be any exam. But I think having additional articles to read on your own time is really important. Because, the purpose of a course like this isn't just to learn new information, it's to change our lives, right? And that's not by the power of me, it's by the power of the topic we're studying. We're studying the Holy Dharma, and the purpose of it is to totally change our lives from worldly lives to spiritual lives. And the way we do that is by becoming more and more familiar with the material. So, as I say over and over again, we need to sam gom sum, we need to study, contemplate, and meditate. And so throughout the week, this isn't a once a week kind of practice. This is an everyday practice. So whenever you're studying a new topic or you're engaging in a class like this, whether it's a class on Bodhichitta or a class on, the tenet systems or grounds and paths or any of the topics that you might study, bring that topic into your meditation every day. It's really important to really remind yourself, why am I studying this? And when you have an opportunity to read additional articles or teachings, they're not just like reading for an intellectual, like for a college course or something like this. You need to read them with the mindset that this is the path to enlightenment. And so when you read them, you can be doing all three: study, contemplate, and meditation at the same time. Whenever you engage in these practices, you're combining those three. So you read them with the mindset that says, I'm focused single pointedly on this reading right now. I'm not going to let the world around me distract me. This is the kind of meditation you're doing. You're familiarizing your mind with the topic of this paper or this teaching. And as you read it, think about the points that make sense to you and the points that don't. And so write down questions that you might have, or write down things that are encouraging to you. In my text, I think it's perfectly fine to highlight and write all over Dharma texts if you're doing it with a good mind and a good intention. So a lot of my texts are covered in highlighter and notes like this. And some people don't like writing in Dharma text, in which case you can keep a journal next to your text and write down questions you have, doubts you have, things that encourage you or inspire you. And do this with every Dharma material you study. And it makes the whole practice much more beneficial. It stops being like a dry practice. So when I suggest these articles, there's no requirement for you to be reading these on your own time. But from my side, the opportunity for you to read additional material is very beneficial. And it's more beneficial when you go through it with a Dharma mind. So you're not just reading it to fulfill an assignment, but you're reading it with the mindset that this is the path to Buddhahood. As the as Tsongkhapa says very clearly in the Lamrim, and as the Kadampa Geshe say in their teachings, you should consider every bit of teaching as personal instruction. So whenever you're studying any of these topics, realize that the Buddhas are speaking directly to you, directly to your experience. I know that when you have that mindset, it's much more profound. I remember once when I was living at Kurikula Center and I was working there in Boston, or outside of Boston, I was also working for the Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive, and I was editing some of the Kopan courses that Lama Zopa Rinpoche had given in the past. And I was doing light editing on them, like the kind of editing to make them available online. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but I was going through some difficulty at the time. And all of a sudden, in this editing work, I realized Lama Zopa was giving me the direct answer I needed. He was speaking directly to me. And he was saying, this is how you solve the problem you're going through right now. And this was from a Kopan course that had been in the 1970s. So it wasn't like a contemporary teaching. But by reading that teaching and engaging with it with an open mind, I realized Lama Zopa was speaking directly to me. It was only for me. And we need to have that mindset when we go into any teaching, anything we study. And that's what lets us get the full flavor of the topic. So I encourage those articles for the week. So we've been talking about why we need to develop Bodhichitta and what Bodhichitta is in the last couple of weeks. Today, we're going to go more into the method of actually developing it in our lives. what we can think about bodhicitta, one of the most important ways to think about it is how much space it creates in our mind, which is to say, we stop being reactive and we're able to be responsive instead. We're able to be deliberate. And we're able to engage with other sentient beings in such a way that only brings them happiness. And that happens by creating more space. So the more space we have, the less confined we feel, the less stressed we feel, the happier we are, because we don't have those limitations. If we think of what bodhicitta is really trying to look at, it's looking at the suffering of all sentient beings, and it wants to free all sentient beings from suffering. So the scope, the object of bodhicitta is huge. It's unimaginable. It's all sentient beings. And so when that's the object that we're focused at with this mind, and our goal is to have this mind become effortless and to pervade every moment of our existence, that's incredibly huge, right? And so when we're able to cultivate even the tiniest flavor of a mind like that, it just expands our mind. And by expanding our mind in this way, it lets us live in a more wholesome way, in a more meaningful way. We find it gives every moment of our existence more purpose. And so we can live the Dharma in every moment. And so developing Bodhicitta, we start with compassion and love. Those are the antecedents to it. But those start with, I think we mentioned a little bit in the Q&A last week, this idea in the West, we talk about self-love and self-compassion, that we have to wish for our own freedom from suffering and wish for our own happiness before we can really wish it for others. Because if we don't understand our own suffering, then how are we able to understand the suffering of others? And so what we'd call this in the Dharma is renunciation, right? Renunciation is the wish to be free from suffering. Renunciation is giving up the clinging to this life. It's not giving up pleasure. It's not giving up nice things. It's giving up the way our minds are attached to those things. It's giving up the perfections of samsara. That's what renunciation is. And so renunciation really is self-compassion. It's wishing for ourselves to be free from all suffering. And it's self-love. It's wishing for us to have every happiness and all the causes of happiness. But it's wishing for a healthy relationship with happiness, one that actually understands what real happiness is and what suffering is, and is not grasping at suffering and thinking it's happiness, which is what we do now in our daily lives. So real self-love and self-compassion is renunciation. It's getting rid of the mind that grasps to the happiness of samsaric pleasures and describes them as real happiness. So we start with self-love, self-compassion, also known as renunciation. Without that foundation, it's very hard to develop compassion for others. That's why in some of the upper realms, the God realms, they experience so little physical suffering. They experience great mental suffering, especially at the time of their deaths, but so little suffering in their day-to-day experience that it's very hard for upper realm beings to newly develop compassion because they don't have the suffering in their lives that would encourage them to then realize others are suffering, to then wish for others to be free from suffering. It's possible, and you can newly develop Bodhicitta as 6 types of rebirth, but it's very difficult because they don't have suffering themselves. They don't have a lot of coarse suffering themselves. So in that way, the suffering we experience is actually an opportunity to practice in a way that is very meaningful. We have to remember that there's no happiness in samsara that we have not enjoyed countless times. Not necessarily in this life, but in all of our lives, over and over again. We have experienced every happiness that samsara has to offer. And in truth, they're all lacking. None of them are happiness. They're all suffering. But if we really come to have a strong conviction that we've experienced these happinesses over and over again, every samsaric pleasure you can imagine we've experienced. When we really come to understand this, and then we see that we're still suffering in samsara, that propels us to want to develop bodhicitta, so we can come closer and closer to Buddhahood, so we can leave behind all of those samsaric pleasures and move into the everlasting bliss of Buddhahood and bring all sentient beings to that state free of all suffering. It's if we look at what we do in our daily lives, and we think about what it means to, start a meditation practice every day, or to read Dharma texts every day, to study like this. And if you're like, well, I don't have enough time. Like, it takes so much time to do these things, right? It's very easy to put them off. Think of how much time we spend indulging our delusions in samsara. Just think of a simple thing, like you want to have a nice meal. Think, how long does it take you to plan? Oh, what am I going to have for dinner? Then you plan out a nice meal. Then you have to go shopping for all the ingredients. And then you get them home and you have to prepare all of them. And then once they're all prepared, you're able to sit down. And then you enjoy this meal. Think of all the work you put into that. And you put all that work in just for the samsaric pleasure of eating a nice meal. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? But we don't think twice about putting in that effort when we want to indulge samsaric pleasures. We'll put in so much effort to gain small worldly returns. Yet, when we sit down to meditate every day, or we take our Dharma texts, all of a sudden it feels like work. We think very actively how much time this is taking from our lives. And that's because we're so unaccustomed to Dharma, and we're so comfortable with samsara, that's the reason. So what we need to do is learn to develop joy in our Dharma practice, and it stops being work. When we develop joy in the virtue of practicing Dharma, then it becomes pleasurable. So taking out a half hour every day to meditate, or an extra half hour to study a Dharma text, or to attend a Dharma class like this, it becomes a joy. And it becomes a virtuous activity just by the joyful mind you cultivate. So rejoicing, finding joy in virtue is really powerful, and it makes all of our Dharma activities easier. But I think it's worth thinking, why do we consider it to be work to do virtuous activities like study the Dharma? And what can we do to cultivate more joy into that experience so it's no longer work, so it's nothing but pleasure? Even studying difficult topics like the tenet systems, or minds and paths, or really complicated, nuanced topics like the 173 different aspects of the 3 types of exalted minds, like list after list after list. Sometimes it's what it feels like. How can we find joy in that? I know for me, obviously, I'm in a different circumstance than most of you, and I've dedicated my life to study in a way, and to extensive study at the monastery. But on top of my studies here, I've had the fortune to be taking private classes every day with one of my teachers, who currently is the disciplinarian, disciplinarian at Gyume Tantra College, and he'll soon be the abbot there. So he's in the line to eventually become the Ganden Tripo, the Ganden throne holder. And every day we study different Tantra texts together, him and I, for about an hour every day. But that means I have to spend an additional hour preparing. So almost every day I take 2 hours to study this one private class. And for me, it's really beneficial. But for him, it's still, even as someone who is one of the highest ranking monks at this tantric monastery, we're studying these different texts that teach the introduction to the 4 types of Tantra. He still wants to study them for himself over and over again. I actually think him giving me materials. So no matter how much we study these materials, we can continue to study them and it might take a lot of our time during the day. It might take hours out of our day to do these things. But it's such a joy to have the opportunity to do this. We're so fortunate to have this perfect human rebirth. We're so fortunate to have the conditions wherein we've met the Mahayana Dharma, and we've met with holy teachers and reliable spiritual friends. Why could we have anything but joy when we study, when we practice, when we meditate? So I really encourage meditation to really examine the mind that precedes it. And is it a mind that looks forward to the work? How can we change that mind? What can we do to make the mind that's excited, even if it's a boring topic? There's so many obstacles to Dharma, so many obstacles to a spiritual life, but we can at least try to overcome them best we can. So we talked about the two types of bodhicitta last week, ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. And we recognize that ultimate bodhicitta is not actual bodhicitta, it's just given that name. But ultimate bodhicitta is the mind that rests in meditative equipoise on emptiness that exists in the continuum of a Mahayana a Mahayana Arya. And it's called ultimate bodhicitta. We say conventional bodhicitta is the doorway or the pathway to the Mahayana path. And so in the same way, having a direct realization of emptiness is the doorway to the Arya paths. And so that's why it's called bodhicitta in this way. And so you'll see in many texts, may I please achieve the two bodhicittas. This is what's being referred to, ultimate bodhicitta and conventional bodhicitta. So what does that mean? That means wisdom and method. So the wisdom is the ultimate bodhicitta, the realization of emptiness, or the direct realization of emptiness in the mind of an Arya bodhisattva or a Buddha. And the method is bodhicitta, which is fueled by great compassion, right? So then conventional bodhicitta, we also say, has two aspects. We say there is the effortless conventional bodhicitta and the effortful conventional bodhicitta. And so again, actual bodhicitta is the effortless kind. And so that when you achieve effortless bodhicitta, that's when you enter into the Mahayana path. And even that is then described as two, as aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta. And I know last week I gave the example, and this is one you often hear, of the difference between aspiring bodhicitta and engaged bodhicitta is like the wish to do something and then actually doing it. Like the wish to go to the store and then actually walking to the store, or the wish to take a drink and then actually taking a drink. But that's not quite true. I mean, that's a good analogy. And it's a good analogy for us to think about how we practice bodhicitta in our lives. In the mind of an actual bodhisattva, the aspiring bodhicitta is bodhicitta that is not yet conjoined with the bodhisattva vows, at least not a firm connection to the bodhisattva vows, and it isn't directly conjoined with the practice of one of the six perfections. And so they say that when I'm trying to not go into other topics too much, but when you enter into the Mahayana paths, the first path is the path of accumulation. Lama Zopa Rinpoche also calls it the path of merit, and that's divided into three, small, middling, and large. And when you achieve the middling path of accumulation, that's when you develop in your continuum the bodhisattva vows that you can never lose. They won't degenerate. And so when a bodhisattva reaches that, the middling path of accumulation, then their bodhisattva vows are stable. And since those vows themselves are the practice of morality, the practice of the perfection of morality, then that's when their bodhicitta becomes engaged bodhicitta. And now, technically, and this is uncommon to different texts, but the way Sarah J. Monks posit it is that in order for it to be engaged bodhicitta, it has to be directly conjoined with one of the practices of the six perfections. And so what it means to be directly conjoined is that it has to be manifest in your mind the same time that one of those practices is manifest. So they both have to be manifest minds. And that comes into difficulty when you're in meditative equipoise. Because when a bodhisattva is in meditative equipoise on emptiness, the only manifest mind they have is that meditative equipoise. So we say they still have bodhicitta, but it is latent. It is not manifest in their mind. So at least the position Sergei monks will take is that at the moment of meditative equipoise, when bodhicitta is not manifest, that is aspiring bodhicitta in the continuum of a bodhisattva, even if they're an Arya bodhisattva. But once they're out of meditative equipoise, then that bodhicitta becomes manifest again, and then it becomes engaging bodhicitta. It's not universally agreed upon. So what's important to remember is that engaging bodhicitta is directly conjoined with the practice of the six perfections and is dependent upon an unwavering bodhisattva vows. So then we look at what we're trying to achieve now, which we'd say is the effortful bodhicitta. So not real bodhicitta, but a facsimile of bodhicitta, a similitude of bodhicitta. So this is the bodhicitta we develop while we're meditating. So it takes effort for us to achieve the state of bodhicitta. It's not natural. It doesn't come effortlessly. But that's why we do the practice. The more and more familiar we become with it, then the more effortless it becomes. So in that way, we can think of our own attempts at bodhicitta to be both aspiring and engaging. So the aspiring bodhicitta is the contemplating that we do, and that little taste of bodhicitta that we're able to develop in our meditation practice. And then when we actually apply ourselves to reliving that bodhicitta in the world, that's the engaging bodhicitta in our lives, or the similitude of engaging bodhicitta. So those two, we have experience of them as well, even though technically the definitions of them are only in the minds of bodhisattvas. So bodhicitta is divided in this way. We also talked about how there are sometimes three types of bodhicitta mentioned: the shepherd-like bodhicitta, and the captain-like or the ferryman-like bodhicitta, and then the king-like bodhicitta. And what these are the different wishes that a bodhisattva or someone who aspires to be a bodhisattva would make in order to develop bodhicitta. So we say that the only one that's an accurate representation of reality is king-like bodhicitta. So that is the wish that I might achieve Buddhahood first in order to lead all sentient beings to Buddhahood. So just the way a king leads his army into battle, and a king is the first one to cross the threshold, that's what we are trying to do, and that's the aspiration for king-like bodhicitta. But it's also possible to develop a mind of shepherd-like bodhicitta. So in the same way a shepherd guides his flock from behind and pushes his flock ahead of him, that we can have the wish for all other sentient beings to first become Buddhas, and only then will we become Buddhas. We can have that wish. Now, actual bodhicitta isn't reflected that way, but that wish is still a valid wish. And in the same way, we could have the bodhicitta that's like a captain or like a ferryman. So it's just the way a captain of a boat guides his boat across the shore, and all the members of the boat, all the crew members, all the passengers arrive at the other shore at the same time. We can say that I wish to achieve Buddhahood simultaneously with all sentient beings. And through that wish, we can develop bodhicitta as well. So bodhicitta can come with these three wishing aspirations. And now we know that shepherd-like bodhicitta and captain-like bodhicitta aren't accurate representations of bodhicitta. Like, that's not possible, right? It's possible for us to achieve Buddhahood first and then guide all others there, which is king-like bodhicitta. So those first two are not accurate representations of reality, but they're not lokshe. They're not confused or incorrect minds. We wish for many things, even knowing they're not possible. The bodhisattvas wish for many things that we know aren't possible. And in the same way we do practices, may I receive the suffering of all sentient beings. We know that's not realistic, right? That we can't actually take other suffering onto ourselves, but we develop the wish to do so. So in that way, all three bodhicittas are valid, and they're not incorrect minds because they're motivated by different types of wish. But actual bodhicitta itself more closely resembles the king-like bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, it needs to have a strong basis like I said, actual bodhicitta, we need to develop calm abiding. So a mind of calm abiding. But to do that, we need to first have faith in the teachings, faith that this is actually a beneficial practice. And we have to have compassion, and we have to have perseverance. We have to be able to overcome difficulties. In the Bodhisattva Grounds by Arya Asanga, he says that in order to develop bodhicitta, we need to have the 4 causes and the 4 conditions and the 4 strengths. So the 4 causes that we need. The first one is the cause of an excellent lineage. And so this can either mean a disposition or the family that you're born into. So what this means is, especially with the idea of an excellent disposition, is a disposition that is turned toward helping other sentient beings. We need to have that as our starting point. A disposition that is turned toward Dharma. And so all of us have that right now, right? So we can already say, okay, that's 1 down. We've got that. We are born in the situation where we're able to study Dharma, and we want to help other sentient beings. Even if we don't have the tools or techniques or the meditative capacity to do so right now, we want to. So we have that disposition already. So we're already born with an excellent lineage. So I rejoice. We're 1 out of 4. That's great. No work. We don't have to do anything. It's just there already. Then the second one, the second of the 4 causes, is properly relying on a valid spiritual friend, like His Holiness Dalai Lama, Khyentse Lama Zopa Rinpoche, or many of the other teachers that we have. And so again, we've got that one down. So 2 out of 4, we're halfway there with these causes. Then the other 2, one is developing great love and compassion, which we're working on, and that's part of the steps that we're going to go through today. And the last one is having or not being discouraged when obstacles arise. And so that's learning how to transform obstacles into part of your practice. And when you do experience obstacles, you can recognize that you're purifying negative karma and rejoice in that experience of obstacles. But that perseverance is very difficult, and not becoming discouraged is very difficult. So that's another one we have to work on, developing perseverance. And so those 4 causes, Asanga says, we need all of them to develop bodhicitta. So we need to have an excellent lineage or a good disposition. We need to have reliable teachers who we follow. We need to have compassion and love, which we're working on. And we need to develop the perseverance that can overcome the many obstacles that will occur, because we're in samsara. Samsara is hard. Samsara is full of obstacles. That's what it is. It's suffering. So we need to develop the perseverance that can overcome the obstacles in order to actually develop a mind of bodhicitta. So those are the 4 causes. We need to have all 4 of them. Now the conditions that Asanga lays out, we don't need all 4. And these aren't direct causes. They're indirect causes that help us develop bodhicitta. So one of them is having seen or heard about the kind of higher powers or the mental capacities of great beings. That encourages us to develop faith and aspiration to be similar to them. So when we see the example of teachers like Khyentse Lama Zopa Rinpoche, His Holiness Dalai Lama, and we realize I have the capacity to develop a loving mind in the same way they have, that is one of the conditions. So seeing the great qualities of realized beings and aspiring to emulate those qualities. Another one is maybe even if we don't have experience seeing or understanding the great qualities of realized beings, but through our study, we develop faith and confidence in the teachings of the Buddha and in the great qualities that accompany realizing bodhicitta. So it's through our study we develop faith and aspiration. That's the second condition that we can try to cultivate. So one is the condition of having experience with great beings and seeing the amazing qualities they have and wanting to emulate those qualities, thereby developing faith and aspiration to do so. Another is, even if we don't have direct experience of realized beings, but we study the Dharma and through that develop faith and conviction. And then the next condition is having the awareness that the Mahayana teachings are the best source to eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings, but realizing that the Mahayana teachings are actually in decline and they're very rare. And realizing that, that encourages us to meditate and to develop bodhicitta, because we realize that preserving the Mahayana teachings is the only way to help sentient beings. And then the last condition is maybe not having the ascertainment of the rarity of the Mahayana teachings, or that they're currently declining, but instead recognizing that all sentient beings are dominated. They're overwhelmed by ignorance, by greed, by all the delusions. And wanting to be a role model for sentient beings, you work to develop bodhicitta for that purpose. So these are the 4 conditions that we have to see at least one of them serving as indirect causes for us to develop bodhicitta. So realizing the great qualities of realized beings and wanting to emulate those qualities, having conviction through study that developing bodhicitta and other high realizations brings about good qualities, having conviction that the Mahayana teachings are the best way to eliminate the suffering of sentient beings and realizing they're in decline, and therefore wanting to help preserve those teachings and developing bodhicitta as a means to do so. And the last one is realizing that all sentient beings are suffering from their delusions and wanting to be a role model for sentient beings. So through these 4 conditions, we begin to develop bodhicitta. So we have the 4 causes, which are then supplemented by at least one of these 4 conditions. And lastly, we have the 4 strengths. So the strength of oneself, which is reflecting on the suffering I've experienced, even if I don't have a direct perception or realization of that suffering, I reflect on my own suffering and realize I want to be free from it. And so what this means by the 4 strengths is they don't serve as causes, but they serve to reinforce the wish to develop bodhicitta that we've already created. So we're reflecting on our own suffering. Our practice of developing bodhicitta becomes stronger, right? So that's what it means by this first strength of oneself. Then there's the strength of others. And so the strength of others is actually perceiving the suffering of other sentient beings and wanting to free them from it. So when you're working to develop bodhicitta, it's just kind of like an intellectual exercise. But when you see other beings who are actually suffering and you have a realization of the suffering other beings go through, that fuels your practice, right? That fills up your gas tank to want to practice bodhicitta more. So that strengthens your bodhicitta practice and development. So that is the strength of others. And then there is the strength of familiarity, or the strength of the cause, which is the fact that we've meditated on bodhicitta in past lives. And because of that, we have some imprints to continue doing it in this life. And that makes our practice stronger. And then there is the strength of the application, which is to say, as we meditate on bodhicitta in this life, it becomes easier and easier. And our practice becomes stronger and stronger. So it nourishes itself. So those are the 4 strengths. And we don't actively need to cultivate them. We just recognize that those are 4 of the factors that help propel our practice forward, make it more meaningful, make it deeper, and make it more of a real part of our lives. Because that's the goal with all of this, right? The goal of this practice is to live with bodhicitta in every single moment of our lives. Whether we're meditating on the cushion, whether we're engaging in a Dharma teaching, or whether we're at our job, whether we're dealing with our kids who are being pains in the butt, whether we're making dinner, we're cleaning the house, whatever we're doing, it needs to be with bodhicitta. It needs to be with the mind that says, I am engaging in these activities so I can eliminate the suffering of all sentient beings. I am traversing the path to Buddhahood so I can eliminate all sentient being suffering. That's my goal. That's the meaning of life, is to benefit others. And so we need to develop that aspiration. And I know this seems like a lot of background information, these causes, right? But by reflecting on them, it gives us more conviction in the practice to develop bodhicitta. And it also gives us a place to say, okay, I can gauge my progress. I can see that I already have the causes and conditions that allow me to develop bodhicitta. So I'm so much further along than most sentient beings. I have so many more resources and privileges than most sentient beings. And because of that, that can encourage our practice. It can make our practice deeper and more meaningful. So there's two general methods that our lineage prescribes for developing bodhicitta, which you may have heard of before. So that's what we'll spend the rest of the time in this class, at least, beginning to discuss. And the first is called the sevenfold cause and effect way to develop bodhicitta. And the second one is called developing bodhicitta through equalizing self and others, or the equalizing and exchanging self and others. So these two methods, the first one was directly taught by Arya Asanga, though we say the lineage is that first it was taught by Shakyamuni Buddha, and from Shakyamuni Buddha it was passed on to Maitreya, and Maitreya passed it on to Asanga, and so he's the one who's associated with it, and then he passed it on to Chandrakirti and his other students, and that's how our lineage of that method comes. And the other method of equalizing and exchanging self and others, we attribute it to Shantideva, but we say that it was taught implicitly by Shantideva. You know, Shantideva has two famous texts, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, the Way of the Bodhisattva, and the Compendium of Practice, the Shisha Samuccaya. And so he doesn't ever lay out the steps directly in those, but he gives the implicit teaching of how to do it. So we say it comes from Shantideva. If we want to trace it back, we say first it was taught by Shakyamuni Buddha, and then from Shakyamuni Buddha it went to Manjushri and to Nagarjuna, and eventually made its way to Atisha. And we say Atisha practiced this method in private. So what is to say, he taught it to only a few students at a time. And that's because the method of exchanging and equalizing self and others is a more difficult method. And we say that it's not for all sentient beings to practice because it involves more work, basically. And so the sevenfold cause and effect, they say, is for students of a lesser capacity, and equalizing and exchanging self and others is for students of a higher capacity. And so he taught it secretly, Lama Atisha did. And we say he taught it to Jamtompa, one of his chief disciples. And Jamtompa taught it to Geshe Potowa, who is one of the Kadampa Geshes. And Geshe Potowa taught it to two of his disciples, to Geshe Sharawa and Geshe Langri Tampa. And then Geshe Sharawa taught it to Chekawa, who was another one of the Kadampa Geshes. And Chekawa realized that it was an appropriate time for that teaching to become manifest in a public way. So he's the one that actually gave explicit teachings on it. So the study of that we say we attribute it to Shantideva, but it was through the kindness of Geshe Chekawa that we have the explicit teachings, and he learned them from Atisha. Atisha learned both of these methods from one of his teachers named Serlingpa. And then Tsongkhapa combined the two. So what we find in the Lamrim is the combination of the two. So instead of a sevenfold cause and effect, we have an 11-step process. So it's an 11-fold meditation. And so what I thought we'd do today is we'd go through the sevenfold, we'd start with that, and then we'll go over the equalizing and exchanging self and others, and then we'll combine them over the next couple classes. We won't do them all today. We won't have time. But so we'll start with the sevenfold, and then we'll intersperse the other parts into it. So very briefly, as an overview, the sevenfold cause and effect, there are a couple different ways to look at it. The most common way people say is that there are 6 causes with one result. That's why it's called cause and effect, or cause and result. And so what those are in sequence is, the first one is we have to recognize that all sentient beings have been our mother. And then we remember the kindness of our mother. And then we develop the wish to repay that kindness. And then from that, we develop great love, or affectionate love. From that, we develop great compassion. And then we develop what they call the special attitude, or the special intention. And from there, those are the 6 causes, with the result being bodhicitta. That's the 7th step. That's one way of understanding cause and effect. We have 6 causes and 1 result. Now, in the Lamrim, Tsongkhapa actually gives us another way of understanding it. And he said, instead of focusing on the result being bodhicitta, he focuses everything on compassion. And so he says, recognizing all sentient beings to be our mother, remembering their kindness, wishing to repay their kindness, these are all the causes of developing compassion. So we need these three to develop compassion. And then the special attitude and bodhicitta are both the results of compassion. So he puts the causes and the results in relationship to compassion. And the affectionate love that we have that precedes compassion, he says it isn't definite that affectionate love serves as a cause for compassion, but we develop it first because generally it is easier to develop love, which is the wish for others to be happy and the happiness of and receive happiness and all the causes of happiness, and as opposed to compassion, which is the wish for them to be free from all suffering and the causes of suffering. So love and compassion in many ways are equal. They're not cause and effect. They don't have that relationship. But so there's two ways to think about the sevenfold cause and effect method of developing bodhicitta as taught by Arya Sangha. The first one is to think of 6 causes with 1 result. And the other one is to focus on compassion as the central kind of pivot. And everything that precedes it, we can think of as causes of compassion, along with affectionate love. And the things that follow it are the results of compassion. And this is following, entering into the middle way by Chandrakirti, where his opening verses are praises of compassion. In most texts, the opening verses are praises to different Buddhas. You start by prostrating to a Buddha of some sort or the different Buddhas. And this is entering the middle way is a text on wisdom, right? So it's focused on, not on method, but focused on wisdom. We say it combines both, but it's focused on wisdom. And yet, the opening praises are praising compassion. Because he says it's from compassion. Compassion is the root cause of becoming a bodhisattva. And becoming a bodhisattva is the cause of becoming a Buddha. And so therefore, he focuses on compassion. And he says, I have to first prostrate to compassion. Because we need compassion in the beginning and in the middle and in the end. We need compassion in order to develop bodhicitta. So it's the seed that sprouts into bodhicitta. We need compassion in the middle, in the same way we need to water and take care of a sprout for it to grow. We need compassion in the middle in that way. And even when we achieve Buddhahood, we still need compassion, because there's that compassion that compels Buddhas to teach and to lead others to Buddhahood. So compassion we need at the beginning, middle, and end. And it is the primary cause to become bodhisattva. And so compassion is the focus of his prostrations in entering the middle way. And so that is the reason Tsongkhapa says another way to think of this practice is focusing on compassion and what are the causes of compassion and what are the results of compassion. So when we begin this meditation, the first step, it's not listed as one of the 7, though it is listed in exchanging self and others. Before we can work to recognize all sentient beings as our mother, we have to develop equanimity. So that's the first step. And we talked about equanimity in our previous discussions together. So the purpose of equanimity, the mind that does not discriminate between friend, stranger, and enemy, the mind that recognizes all beings are equal in the wish to be happy and the wish to be free from suffering, and they're all equally deserving of our attention and our love. And all sentient beings are equal in the ultimate sense, in that they all are empty of being permanently established. So the equanimity that realizes that serves as the foundation or the stable basis from which we can begin our meditation. Otherwise, if we don't really develop this equanimity, it's easy for our attachment to kind of masquerade as concern, right? It's easy if we think about the people in our lives who we care about, who are close to us, our family and our friends, and we think we have deep concern for them. But what we really have is attachment. And that attachment wears the mask of being a legitimate concern. And there is concern, I'm sure, mixed in, but it's still attachment. But when we develop equanimity, we no longer discriminate between friend and enemy and stranger. So the wish to benefit our friends that we have, it's the same wish we have to benefit those who harm us. And it's the same wish we have to benefit those who we're indifferent to. So no matter how our mind is clouded by attachment, ignorance, and hatred, and through those delusion projects labels on other sentient beings, regardless of that, we have the same relationship with them, one of loving kindness, one of wishing to free them from all suffering. So we need that equanimity. In the same way that when you're building a house, you need to first build the foundation, otherwise it'll topple over. We need to have that secure basis, that stable basis. Otherwise, our practice of bodhicitta is always going to be toppling over. Our practice of developing compassion will never be robust because it will always be one-sided. It'll be lopsided. So we start with equanimity. And this equanimity isn't the same as the equanimity in the four immeasurables. You might have recited that prayer or studied the four immeasurables. Immeasurable love, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable joy, and immeasurable equanimity. These four minds that we try to cultivate. And so in that, immeasurable equanimity is actually the wish for other beings to abide in equanimity, which is a place free of attachment and anger. So immeasurable equanimity, developing that mind, is the wish for others to abide in equanimity. When we say equanimity here, we're wishing for us to develop the mind that does not discriminate. And we have to recognize there's a distinction between discriminating wisdom and discrimination, right? So we want to develop discriminating wisdom. Discriminating wisdom is the mind that is able to look at its object and understand it in the correct way, in a way that is aligned or concordant with reality. So when we look at sentient beings who harm us, those who bring us pleasure, and those who we're indifferent to, discriminating wisdom is the mind that looks at them and says there's no difference between them at all. Whereas discrimination is the mind that says, this is one I like and I'm going to help. This is one I don't like and therefore I'm going to hurt or I'm going to ignore. And this is one I have no opinion of. So the word is the same, but what we're doing is this active process of developing discriminating wisdom. And we're getting rid of indifference. Okay? So it needs to be active. It's not a passive process. And this needs to pervade all of our practice. It has to be part of our meditation every day. It has to be part of our life every day. And at first, it can seem overwhelming. It can seem like, well, if I love all sentient beings the same way I love my family members and friends, then does that diminish my care and attention to my family members and friends? That's the concern. That's what it feels like at first. Because we think of these virtuous qualities in a zero-sum game. But that's not the case. We have a capacity for infinite love and compassion. You know, we have the capacity to become Buddhas. Tathagata Garbha. Every sentient being can become a Buddha. They all have equal capacity to do so. And as human beings, we have the capacity to have an analytical mind that nurtures our good qualities. So we have the capacity for infinite love and compassion. So loving all sentient beings the same way a mother loves her only child doesn't diminish our love or our feelings of joy that are related to people we care about. But what it does is it brings all sentient beings to that same place. And the more we practice it, we realize that our compassion and our love, oh, that's my puppy's compassion and love. Sorry about that. Our compassion and love doesn't run out. It's not finite. It's not a zero-sum game. So we don't have to worry. We don't. Hold on one second. I apologize. Sorry, I have, in the mornings, I have the choice of either locking the dog in the room or out of the room. And if I lock him out of the room, he spends the whole time scratching at the door to get in. But if I lock him in the room and he hears dogs outside of the room, this is the obstacle we face. I apologize. You know. He's a very small dog, but his voice would belies that fact. Okay, puppy? So we have to recognize that we have the capacity for infinite compassion and love. And that by equalizing, by developing equanimity, the realization that we don't discriminate between friend, stranger, and enemy, that doesn't diminish the care we have for the people we love. Instead, it elevates the care for others. So that's a concern people have. And it's a very natural concern because our relationship to our enemies, quote unquote enemies, and our relationship to strangers right now is one that's pervaded by samsaric minds. And we have the idea that our capacity to care for others is finite, is because that's our experience. Because the kind of care and compassion we have isn't genuine compassion, but it's one that is mediated by samsara. So we have to develop a compassion, an actual compassion, actual love that isn't mediated by attachment. And by doing that, we realize our capacity is infinite. And so the practice of equanimity sets the groundwork for that. And we can just think about, in our daily lives, we interact with so many people, right? Think about how your life would be different if every time you met someone, you had the same love and tenderness toward them that a parent has to their only child. That if you saw them suffering in even the smallest way, you wouldn't hesitate for a moment to help them. Every single sentient being you meet in your day, how would that change your interactions with them? With your coworkers, with your students, with your friends, with your boss, with the barista who makes you a coffee. How would your experience of them change if you realized they were just as important to you as your friends and family, and your wish for them to be happy and free from suffering was the exact same as the wish you have for those you hold dear? We can just think of even pretending this, right? As we develop this mind, it will totally change the way we relate to other beings. It's a really profound practice. Even just this first step, developing equanimity, can radically transform our lives. Because we're so used to following the urges of samsara that says this person harms me, therefore they aren't deserving of my love or my compassion. They aren't deserving of my tenderness. And this person, I don't know them. They don't mean anything to me. So why should I care about them? We're so accustomed to that, we don't even think about it. And now, of course, if we live in the real world, we can't always, in a conventional sense, act in the same way towards our boss when they're shouting at us as we do to our family members, right? We have different types of relationships in the world. So that's a reality. But the mindset that we cultivate has to be one that sees them all equal. And that will transform our experience. One of the bases for developing this equanimity is the realization that there is no certainty in samsara. There's no stability. So just because you call someone a friend in the morning, they might become an enemy by the afternoon. They say one thing that upsets you, one insult or critique, right? These labels, they shift so quickly because the labels are just projections of our mind. And that's just in this life. The idea that someone that's our friend in this life has been our enemy countless times in the past. And someone who is our enemy in this life has been our best friend countless times in the past. So whether we think about it in the scope of just this life or on the scope of our infinite past lives, we see that there's no stability in samsara. The story that's often told to demonstrate this is the way Pabonka tells it. It's a little bit different than the way others tell it. I went on a little bit of a rabbit hole to find this story today because the way I've always heard it is as taught by Pabonka in Liberation for the Palm of Your Hand. And there's no citation, which is very strange because in the newer publications of that text, they cite everything usually. So then I did some searches as best I could using some online ways to search the Kangyur and search different texts. And I found the same story taught by many teachers. Going back, the oldest one I could find was the 5th Dalai Lama. But all the other teachers report the story as being Arya Katyayana instead of Shariputra. But otherwise, it's mostly the same. But even then, they don't source it. And finally, I found a source in the Kangyur, the actual word of the Buddha, which was a little bit different even then. And it was ascribing the story to Madhgalyayana, so a different disciple of the Buddha. But anyway, the story goes this Arhat, this Arya, whoever it was, Shariputra, Madhgalyayana, Katyayana, they travel to this one town and they see a householder. And that householder, they go into that householder's house for alms. And the householder is sitting there with his wife and his young child on his lap, eating a fish curry. And they're taking the bones from the fish and throwing them to the family dog, who's gnawing on them desperately. And the householder says, "Friend, you can leave right now. We don't offer alms to mendicants here." So Madhgalyayana leaves. And as he's leaving, there's someone outside the gate who knows who Madhgalyayana is. And he knows what a kind of, he's one of the foremost in developing magical powers, they say, from the Buddha and from his practice. And so he says, "How astounding is it that someone as revered as you isn't able to receive alms in a place like this? That's amazing." And Madhgalyayana, wishing, they say, to instill awareness in samsara, says that's not astounding. What's really astounding is that the fish curry that he's eating is made from the bones of his father. And those bones are being fed to his mother, the dog. And his enemy, who was his wife's lover, who he murdered, is sitting on his lap as he feeds him. That is what is astounding. And so the story is that the original householder they have a fish pond behind their house, and he would every day catch fish in that pond and eat them. And then when he died, he was reborn as a fish in that pond. And then the mother of the household was so fiercely protective of that house and so attached to it that when she died, he was reborn as a dog that constantly walked in circles around the house, guarding it from outsiders. And the son's wife took a lover, and when he found out, he killed that person. But that person was so attached to the wife, he was reborn as the son. So now his father is reborn as a fish that he catches and he cooks. And his mother is reborn as a dog who he feeds the bones to. And his enemy is reborn as his son who he holds on his lap and he lavishes with attention and food and love. And that shows that samsara isn't definite. So the verse they often say is, he eats his father's flesh while he beats his mother. He holds the enemy he killed on his lap. And the wife gnaws on the bones of the husband. Samsara is such a joke. Or the way the fifth Dalai Lama says it is, samsara is so depressing. It's a little change in the way he says it. Nothing is definite in samsara. So the labels we give people are merely projections from our mind, based on our very limited understanding. And so when we can develop confidence in this, then we develop equanimity. And that equanimity becomes the basis for our development of bodhicitta. And so that brings us to the next step, which is recognizing all sentient beings as our mother. So they actually say that in the whole process of developing bodhicitta, this is the most difficult step. This is actually the hardest. Once you have a firm ascertainment that all sentient beings are, in fact, your mother, they've been your mother countless times. Once you have that ascertainment, then everything else comes much more easily. But we practice all the steps now, recognizing this step is very difficult. So how do we develop confidence in this? Well, we start by recognizing that we have been born in samsara again and again, infinite times. And so because of this, we say every other sentient being has been our best friend, has been our enemy, and not only that, has been our mother, both when we're born as humans and when we're born as other types of beings. And every type of rebirth, we've had relationships with every other type of sentient being because we've been cycling in samsara since beginningless time. So every other sentient being is our dear mother. And so if we don't have confidence in the laws of karma, and we don't have confidence in past and future lives, it becomes very hard to develop a conviction in this, which is why we need to study those topics first. But we can develop conviction in past and future lives simply by realizing that everything that exists needs a substantial cause that precedes it. So we are made of the 5 aggregates, which is the form aggregate and 4 mental aggregates. And so in order for that to come physical body has as its substantial cause the egg and semen from our parents. Those serve as a substantial cause as our body. But from form, we can't develop a mind. So our mind also needs a substantial cause that precedes it. And that substantial cause has to be a moment of mind. In order for the first moment of mind to exist in this life, it has to be preceded by a substantial cause, which is a mind. And we can't get that from our parents. Our parents serve as the substantial cause for our physical body, but not of our mind. So then what serves as a substantial cause of our mind? And the logic says that it has to be a moment of mind that preceded that, which is a moment of mind from our previous life. So after we die and we're reborn in the bardo, this in-between state, that bardo mind is what becomes the immediate substantial cause for our mind in this life. And this is the logic that Buddhists use to develop a strong conviction in past and future lives. That the mind is a continuum and it doesn't stop. The mind, that continuum of mind is never cut. Eventually, when that mind is perfectly purified and we have realized complete realizations, that mind becomes the mind of a Buddha, the omniscient mind of a Buddha, that has abandoned all obstacles entirely. It's the same continuum of mind that we have now, and the same continuum of mind we've had since beginningless time. So it's one continuum of mind. And so if we believe that, we develop conviction in past lives in that way, and we develop conviction that we've been cycling in samsara over and over again, then it's very easy to see how all sentient beings, we've had relationships with them in the past. And because of that, they've all been our mother in the past. And if that's the case, then we can look at all sentient beings in this life in the same ways we look at our mother of this life. Because they've been our mother. And it's only the circumstances of samsara that makes them not our mother in this life. That's the only difference, is the situation of samsara causes them not to be our mother in this life, but they've been our mother numerous times in the past. So why do we use the mother as an example? And it's funny, all of the teachings, the traditional teachings, they don't really belabor this point too much. But if you look at any teachings that are given to Westerners, I think that's when the Tibetan Lamas realized that a lot of Westerners have difficult relationships with their mothers that they weren't accustomed to. So they started teaching this point more directly or more explicitly. So it's true that many of us might have difficult relationships with our mothers. But the way the Buddhist teachings describe the relationship between a mother and child is one that is almost like an unbreakable bond. And so when we go into the next step, remembering the kindness of the mother, we'll talk about the different types of kindness that generally a mother has toward their child. But so by focusing on the mother, which is the epitome of selfless love and of selfless compassion, that develops in us a wish to repay them even more fervently. So as you do this practice, if it becomes difficult to focus on the mother, there are other ways to amend the practice. But there's a reason for actually focusing on the mother, which we'll get into when we get into the next step, the kindness of mothers. And in fact, for those of us that have difficult relationships with our parents or with our mother, that actually becomes a more powerful meditation object, because that relationship, that difficulty, is a result of our self-cherishing mind, right? It's a result of our mind being pervaded by the 8 worldly dharmas, and those are what are defining our relationships. And so actually, if we have some sort of emotional difficult relationship with our mother, they become a more powerful object of our meditation. But in either case, there are other ways we can modify the practice if we want to. But we'll get into the kindness of the mother shortly. And again, thinking about how this plays out in our real lives, in our daily life. Even if we don't have a strong conviction and we just have a kind of forced belief, how would you treat other beings that you interact with if they were your mother? Every sentient being you meet, think, this is my mother. How would that change how you relate to them? How you act around them? What you do in relationship to them? It's a wildly radical practice. You know, Buddhism is often considered this very peaceful, laid back relaxed kind of practice based on meditation and chilling out, if you look at it from the outside. But we know from the inside that's not the case. This is about radical transformation of our minds. It's about totally changing the way we live in the world. Okay? Buddhism is the most radical practice we can do. And it doesn't have any space for us to be lazy. It's saying we have to do this now. We have to totally change the way we've lived, because the way we've lived has been in accordance with samsara. And that's gotten us some benefit, worldly benefit, but it hasn't gotten us any spiritual benefit. And if we want to actually benefit other sentient beings, we have to live in accordance with the Dharma, which means totally upending the way we're used to relating to the world. So it's a radical practice that we have to engage in. And that's what the Buddha asks us to do, is something radical. And I don't just mean give up your normal life and become a monk and live in a forest or live in a monastery. Sure, that's radical, okay. Just practicing the Dharma as a layperson in your life is radical. It's amazing what kind of transformation the Buddha Dharma offers us. So even if you don't become a zealot like me and move away and go into retreat somewhere, even if you're not an extremist like that, the transformation is amazingly radical. It's incredible. There's no passivity involved. It's totally reorienting the way you experience the world. And that's what we're called to do. And that's how we find meaning in our life, by realizing that developing this new radical idea, by totally transforming our mind, we become better human beings. We become the sources of benefit for other sentient beings, not just for ourselves. And by doing that, we find happiness in this life, happiness in future lives. We find happiness for other sentient beings. So all the personal benefits we get are all just side effects of working for other sentient beings. And that is a really samsara-shattering revolution. So if we think, every time you meet someone, this is my mother, how does that change how you engage with that person? How does that change the relationship you have with that person? Or not that person, that sentient being. Every dog on the street, every mouse that's stealing your food, every mosquito that bites you. This is my mother, who's been kind to me in infinite ways. How can I have anything but love for them? That's what we have to develop. And this is hard. Never mind that we might have difficult relationships with our mother, but just developing this ascertainment is hard, because we're not used to thinking outside of the parameters of this one life. And even if we can gain an intellectual understanding that, yes, I believe that there are past lives, and yes, I believe my past lives are infinite, then of course all sentient beings have at some point been my mother, just as I've been their mother. I can develop an intellectual understanding of that, okay, fine. Actually believing that, developing an ascertainment, is difficult. Shantideva says, there is nothing that is not made easier through familiarization. No matter how difficult something is, the more we practice it, the easier it becomes. So this ascertainment is really, really hard to actually achieve. But that's where we start, because it's a critical foundation. And we do it by practicing on the meditation cushion and then practicing out in the world. Just say to yourself, try going the day. Whenever you meet with someone, think to yourself, this is my kind, dear mother. Actually bring that mind to the forefront of your awareness and see how that changes how you react to people. Actively do it. Even if it's faked, it's forced, right? We don't have that effortless ascertainment, but we can develop an effortful ascertainment. This is my kind, dear mother. I'm going to treat this person the same way I treat my dear mother, because they've been my mother in the past, numberless times. So we practice. We practice it every single day, not just on our meditation cushion, but in our lives, and it becomes easier and easier and easier. And we develop this actual conviction that all sentient beings have been our mother. And so then, when we develop that conviction, then we move on to the next step of developing bodhicitta, which is remembering the kindness of our mother. So we say that our mother has been kind to us in infinite ways. We've already done the step of recognizing all sentient beings as our mother. And so now, the next step is to repay their kindness. And so we think of the way the mother has been kind to us. We say the mother has been kind in infinite ways. Our mother has suffered through pregnancy and birth and the experience of that and all the pains that accompany that. Then our mother has removed any difficulties or obstacles for us. Our mother has taught us the way of the world, how to live in the world, has gotten us all the things we need to live a meaningful life. And in general, we say that our mothers also experience great hardship for our sake. So, and not only do they experience hardship, but they accumulate negative karma to benefit us, right? So we say, what kind of mother, wouldn't go out of her way to steal food if she needed to feed her children? So they're willing to accumulate negative karma for our benefit. So we think of the difficulties that a mother has to experience, and we're just speaking of a human mother, but we can think of it as any type of mother that carries an animal, in a womb especially. The difficulties of pregnancy, carrying us for 9 or 10 months, and all of the work that goes into that to making sure that they don't do anything that could harm the baby, that the way you eat, the way you exercise, the way you do everything changes, right? And, many of us, like myself, have never had the experience of being pregnant, obviously. But for those of you who have, or those of you who at least know someone who's been pregnant, you see how much effort it is, right? So just the act of being pregnant, never mind then the act of giving birth or in some way having birth, and then the pain and the difficulties that come with that. Mothers all do that for us. They've gone through all that suffering just for our benefit. And they have provided the conditions for us to have this perfect human life. Yes, it was our mind in the Bardo that was attracted to being reborn as a human. That's true. It was our karma that propelled us to a human rebirth. But our mother, our very kind dear mother, served as the basis for our human body. And so in that way alone, they provide us a great kindness. Because our perfect human rebirth is the reason we have the opportunity to study and practice Dharma the way we do. So from that point alone, our mother has been incredibly kind by serving as the basis for us to develop a perfect human body. But aside from that, they've gone through so many difficulties, carrying us in the womb, giving birth to us, and then after we're born, going out of their way to take care of us, to give us clothing, food, shelter, love, nurture, encouragement. How much work it takes to raise a child, to keep them safe. Think of a newborn child and how many difficulties there are, how many dangers there are for a newborn child to face. And our mother protects us from all those difficulties in the world. Really contemplating that and how selfless a mother is toward their children. It can't be anything but love and compassion in your heart. Tokme Zampo says in his 37 practices of a bodhisattva, how is it possible for me to ever have happiness if my dear mothers are still suffering? It's impossible. Because we have to realize they've given their whole lives to benefiting us. And the kindness they've shown us is astounding. So there are many different points we can think about regarding this. I won't go through all of them now. We'll go through some of them in the meditation later. But as we're getting almost time for a little bit of a break, so I don't think we need to go too much more detail. We'll get it later. But so the second step is, after we have recognized that sentient beings have been our mother, we recognize that, or we remember the kindness of our mother in this life and our mother in past lives. Think of, when we're reborn as an animal, say we're reborn as a baby bird, our mother had to kill all these insects and ants and then chew them up and then feed us them. So how many other sentient beings were killed by our mother just to nourish us? How much negativity has our mother taken on just to take care of us? Willingly, selflessly. So incredibly kind. Where would we be without the kindness of our mothers? Even those of us that have difficult relationships with a mother can think, this mother has given me a perfect human body or perfect human rebirth or provided the basis for that. And that alone is amazing. And think about how much distress and how much anguish our mother goes through for our behalf. I was actually born 2 months premature. So I wasn't breathing when I was born. I was born blue. And I was in the NICU, the neonatal ICU, for 2 months before they took me out from the hospital. And I can only imagine. My mother's a nurse, so what anguish that is, right? How difficult that is. And so whenever I have, even in this life, some sort of obstacle or difficulty with my mother, I think of how much anguish she went through just to bring me into this world. And then how much she worked. When I was a child, she often worked 2, 3 jobs, 80 hours a week, 100 hours a week, to make sure me and my siblings could have, a good home and have clothing, have food. How much suffering she undertook to benefit us. And then when I was young, again, just bringing it to using me as an example, I developed a disease called legs calves perthes disease, which is a very strange, weird disease where the bone, the femoral head, so the top of your femur bone, stops getting blood flow, so it causes it to disintegrate, and basically your legs fall out of their socket. And so for over a year, I was hospitalized in a special hospital in Springfield, in the Shriners Hospital in Springfield, which is about an hour away from where I grew up. And every day, my mother would come visit me. Every single day. And I was 4 years old. So it never occurred to me how difficult it would be for her to work a full day's job, a full 8 to 10 hours at work, and then drive an hour to spend time with me. And then drive an hour to go make dinner and take care of the other 2 children. Or I guess at that point, I don't know. My brother either was a baby or not quite born yet, but to take care of my sister as well. Every day for a year, almost a year. That's incredible. Like, how could I ever have anger towards my mother, no matter what she may say or do in this life? Think of how much time and energy she's been dedicated to me. And that's just an example for me, but I'm sure in most of our lives we can think of experiences of our mother, even if they've been difficult, and even if they haven't been the best mother all the time, where they've undertaken extreme hardships just to help us out of love and compassion for us. They give us food, give us compassion, give us learning, give us access to education. It's very easy to think of examples. And if you had a very difficult relationship with your mother, you could think of someone else in your life who similarly showed that kind of kindness to you. It doesn't have to be a blood relative. We use the mother because they do suffer different types of suffering for us, but we can think of anyone in our life who has been that dedicated to us and realize that that relationship we have with that person, we've had that relationship with every other sentient being. Every sentient being has been our mother. Every sentient being has gone out of their way to feed us, clothe us, love us, over and over again. Every sentient being has accumulated imaginable negative karma just to bring us joy and benefit. Every sentient being has done that. And so when you really contemplate in this way, that's what develops the next step. So after recognizing the sentient beings have been our mother, and after remembering the incredible kindness of our mothers, then we develop the wish to repay that kindness. Then we say, how can I be happy if my mother is not happy? If every one of my suffering mothers is not happy, is not free from suffering, how can I have happiness? How can I be content when I see my mother suffering? When I see my mother, the stray dog on the side of the road, who isn't fed and who is covered in lice, suffering, how can I be happy? When I see my mother, the terrorist, who is overwhelmed by their delusions, causing so much pain and suffering to others and developing so much negative karma, how can I be happy? When I see my mother, my child, my friend, who is unhappy and depressed, and who isn't living a life they find meaningful, how can I be happy? When I see any sentient being suffering in samsara, I realize they're my mother. They've been so kind to me infinite times. How can I be happy if they're suffering? and I can't. So I need to repay their kindness. Think, when someone has done something very nice for you, our immediate reaction is to want to repay them, right? When someone helps you out in some worldly way, right away, you want to repay their kindness in kind, you know? When someone comes and helps you move the furniture out of your apartment, you buy them pizza, right? You always want to repay people's kindness, even in the simple ways, okay? That's so easy to us. It's natural. And when we take a debt from someone, whether it be a financial debt or some sort of emotional debt, right away we want to repay that. That's our second nature. So why don't we realize the incredible debt we have to all other sentient beings? Why do we not realize that they've been infinitely kind to us and done nothing but benefit us? And that all of our happiness in this life comes from other sentient beings. So we have a debt to all of them. And we should develop the incredible aspiration to repay that debt. So that's the next step, wishing to repay the kindness. And so I think that's a good place to end for today. What we'll do is take a 5-minute break. Hopefully my internet will stay on during those 5 minutes. Everyone else can stretch their legs, maybe get something to drink. We'll come back and do a meditation, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. How does that sound? So right now, my clock says 8:05, so that must mean it's what? 8:35 p.m., like that,
Yes.
right? So 5 minutes. We'll take a quick 5-minute break and then come back, okay? Okay. Welcome back, everyone. So I think I've gone a little bit long today so far. So what I'm again going to do an abbreviated meditation just to leave some time for questions and answers at the end. But as normal, these meditations you can do, and I encourage you to do much more elaborate versions. And as we continue going through the steps of developing bodhicitta, you can kind of cycle through the meditations. So eventually, when we combine the two methods of the sevenfold cause and effect, along with equalizing and exchanging self and others, we say there's 11 steps to the meditation. What you can do is maybe for 1 week, just focus on one of those steps. So the other steps, maybe you do very quickly, but that one step will be the bulk of your meditation practice. And then move on to the next step in the following week. And so that way, every week, you have all the steps involved, yet you focus on just one. So if you don't have a long time to meditate every day and you can't bring in an extra, however many minutes it takes, then you can go on these steps one at a time. And so you try to keep your practice complete, but you can focus on just one or a few steps. So today, we're just going to focus on these first 4 steps because we haven't discussed the others. So developing affectionate love and compassion and so on, we won't talk about those in today's meditation. We'll go through the steps quite quickly, but I encourage you throughout the week to practice with a little more time. So take the time now to get yourself in an appropriate position, whatever that may be, whether you're sitting cross-legged or sitting in a chair. You want to be stable, you want to be balanced, you want to be comfortable, your spine nice and straight, your hands either resting on your thighs or in the meditation mudra, your head gently on top of your spine, following the natural curve of your spine, your jaw nice and loose, not tight, not clenched, your lips and teeth hang open, your tongue resting gently on the hard palate behind your upper teeth, your eyes halfway open, gazing down the end of your nose, not focused, but not closed, awake, not asleep. And let your breath fall into its natural rhythm, and for a moment, let your mind follow the breath. Now think, it is never enough to gain only liberation for myself, attachment to personal peace, and striving solely for this is both selfish and cruel. And therefore, I work for the benefit of all mother sentient beings. Visualize that you are surrounded by all sentient beings, with your mother seated to your left-hand side, your father seated on your right. Now in front of you, visualize an enemy, someone who dislikes you or who has harmed you. Behind you, place your dearest friend, someone who you are very dearly attached to. And now on the side, you visualize a stranger, someone towards whom you're neutral. And so as you're flanked by your father and mother, and you have these three individuals firmly visualized, not just conceptually, actually visualize specific individuals for this. Someone who's harmed you, someone who is dear to you, and someone who you're indifferent toward. All at the same time in this meditation. Once you have a firm visualization of them, think, there is no reason at all for me to be attached to and help my friend. There is no reason for me to harm my enemy. Those labels are merely projections of my deluded mind. All sentient beings are the same in wishing to be free from suffering and wishing for happiness. All sentient beings are the same in being deserving of my love and compassion and my help, my benefit. And any distinction between sentient beings is only a fabrication of my deluded mind and of my inability to recognize the scope and expanse of samsara, how indefinite and uncertain it is. And therefore I will hold all these beings as equal. Just as I wish to avoid suffering and find happiness, so too do all other sentient beings. Therefore, all other sentient beings and I are equal. There is no logical reason for me to care more about myself than others, or for me to care more about my friend than an enemy or a stranger. So I firmly resolve I will hold all sentient beings equal. And now, with your friend, an enemy, and stranger, all visualized, along with your father and mother, visualize all sentient beings take the aspect of your mother in this life. So the enemy in front of you, the dear friend behind you, the stranger off to your side, all have the same aspect of your dear kind mother. And think, because the mind is beginningless, samsaric transmigration is beginningless, my own previous lives are numberless, but due to different individual karmas, my present mother was not my mother in all of my previous lives. In fact, every other sentient being has at some point been my mother, whether I've been born as a human, born as an animal. The enemy in front is my dear, kind mother, has been my mother countless times. My dear friend behind me is my dear kind mother, has been my mother countless times. A stranger toward whom I have a feeling of indifference is my dear kind mother, and has been my mother countless times. All sentient beings have been my mother, and they're all trapped in samsara, suffering terribly without any means of escape. Just as I would do anything to free this life's mother from suffering, so I must do whatever I can to free all these beings, my mothers, from previous lives. Develop this firm resolve. And now think, my mother has been kind to me in infinite ways, but especially in the 4 ways of giving me this body, of protecting me from life's dangers, of leading me in the path of the world, and of bearing many hardships and accumulating negative karma for my sake. All of my dear kind mothers experienced great suffering while carrying me in their womb, mental and physical suffering. They experienced the great suffering of childbirth. They've been kind to me in this way. If my mother hadn't fed me, hadn't given me clothing, shelter, hadn't given me opportunity to study, I wouldn't have developed to where I am today. They've been infinitely kind to me in this way. My mothers have protected me from all the dangers of the world. They've kept me warm, safe. They've given up their own food to feed me. They've been infinitely kind to me in this way. And all of my dear mother sentient beings have accumulated so much negative karma on my behalf and undergone so many hardships and difficulties just to bring me joy and happiness. They've sacrificed themselves in countless ways just to benefit me. They've been infinitely kind to me in this way. And so as we have this visualization of all sentient beings surrounding us in the form of our dear kind mother from this life, we realize that all sentient beings have been our mother, and we realize that they've been kind to us in infinite ways, especially the 4 ways of giving us this body, protecting us from life's dangers, leading us on the path of the meaningful life in the world, and of experiencing hardship for our sake. Because they have been so infinitely kind to me, I now develop the strong wish to repay their kindness. And as I develop this strong motivation, I realize that repaying mother sentient beings in terms of their worldly needs is beneficial, but is not the most beneficial way to practice. So I want to repay their kindness primarily with spiritual benefit, as well as material benefit. I want to repay their kindness by giving all sentient beings the tools to destroy all suffering. So develop the strong conviction to repay the infinite kindness of all of your dear mother sentient beings. And now, allow the visualization around you. All sentient beings who are in the shape of your mother condense into one. So the only visualization that remains is your mother of this life in the space in front of you. You visualize her as being the embodiment of all sentient beings who have been your mother infinite times, who have been infinitely kind to you. And whose kindness you strongly wish to repay, realizing there's no happiness in samsara if your dear kind mothers are suffering. And so as this resolve builds and builds in your heart, allow the visualization of your mother to fade, but this resolve to remain strong. And without diminishing that resolve, allow your awareness to return to the group. Thank you. I think that's the fastest I've ever done that meditation. Sorry for that. That's due to circumstances of me keep losing my internet and not being very good at gauging time. I apologize, but I want to make sure I don't overlap with other programs that are happening. So we have a few minutes left. If there are any questions, people are free to ask them.
Looks like Jay has one.
Yep, I've got, it's more of a comment than anything else. And I don't, yeah, it's interesting for me. Yes, I've had a conflictual relationship with my mother. I feel pretty resolved with that. I have had a close relationship with my grandmother, but I still feel in terms of creating bodhicitta, if I can visualize everybody, okay, so everybody's been my mom, so I've been everybody's mom as well. And when I think about being the mother of a sentient being, particularly one that I have difficulty with, I can visualize them as an infant and feel very benign and send them, positive and wish well for them. So just a comment. I find this quite interesting because for me, it's a much more effective pathway to bodhicitta. So I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I'll comment is, yeah, I've got to go promptly at 12:30 to the Vajrasattva practice, so I'll have to skedaddle.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about this in more depth, maybe next time would be appropriate. Yep.
Definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
a
you for
lot.
the comment. Yeah, we could talk more about it next time. I will just say that, we have many obstacles. So whatever we can use to get over those obstacles is beneficial. And that's true. We've been others' mother infinite times. And that is a helpful thing to think about for some of us. And it does create a sense of loving kindness that feels natural. The reason we focus on our mother as opposed to our children, our infinite children, is because by focusing on the mother and the way they've been kind to us, that develops the sense of wanting to repay them, which is really propulsive. Whereas if we think of all other sentient beings as our children, which they have been infinite times, then we no longer have we no longer feel the same need to repay them because we don't think of the kindness that the children have offered us. We think of the kindness of the mother. So that's generally why it's laid out in this fashion, but there are other techniques to develop that. So
Yeah.
those are
I
things
would
we can
just say
practice.
that the pull for me is very strong in terms of wanting to take care of. And that seems so related to the bodhicitta concept as well.
Yeah. Well,
So
yeah, exactly. It's not contradictory, definitely. So if that's the method that is most useful, then that is a good one to practice.
thank you. See you next week.
Yeah, take care. Anything else in the last few minutes? Okay. Well, I apologize for going so late. I do encourage you to look at those teachings that I suggested. That again, they come from the handout this week. I will just one more time post them in the chat to make sure everyone had a chance to get them. So the handout is available on the class website, but I can also put it into the chat window so you can just download it directly from there. And the three teachings I'm recommending that you read over the week are the second, the third, and the sixth in that handout. Their names are listed there in the chat. And again, don't think of extracurricular reading like this as homework or as a chore, but really try to develop joy in the opportunity to deepen your practice and to bring this into your meditation every day, right? That's the real goal, is that every time you sit down to meditate or every time you look at a Dharma text, whether it be a word on a screen or a book or whatever it may be, that should spark joy in your mind, and nothing but joy. And that's what we need to develop. So try to continue that practice throughout the week. And if any questions come up from those, maybe write them down and we can go over them next week. And other than that, we will end with a quick dedication prayer. Through this virtue may I swiftly, having gained Guru Buddha state, place each and every sentient being without exception in that state. Precious supreme Bodhi mind, may it where unborn arise, and where born never decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me this evening. I appreciate your time and your commitment, and I look forward to seeing you all again next week. Take
Thank
care.
you.